by the Attorney General exercising its pattern and practice investigation powers that we gave in 2017, the first in the nation, and this will be the first of its kind, we have affirmed what the citizens of Aurora and so many folks already knew, that the Aurora Police Department has has operated in a way that is racist and that is particularly racist against Black people and presents harm to our communities. I was particularly interested in the investigation that showed that the Aurora Police Department flagrantly ignored accountability legislation, that they consistently have a pattern and practice of abuse that is racially motivated and that harms its citizens, sometimes ending in death. That includes the use of ketamine. And so in this report, the Attorney General has said, using the powers of 217, but also citing House Bill 1250 and 1251 of this year, that Aurora Police Department and other departments within the city of Aurora need to change their behaviors immediately. What we have created and what has been created, in the city of Aurora is dangerous. It's dangerous for all of its citizens. And it's time for the city to work with its police department and the state of Colorado to make immediate changes and to rectify past abusive practices that have happened in their communities. And so while today we can claim that Senate Bill 217, 1250, and 1251 are working, we still shouldn't celebrate, because what it means is that there has been harm that has been done to real people in our communities, some that will never be able to speak up about what happened to them. But hopefully this will prove to some people and vindicate to others that what they believe happened to them was real, that what they believe that they are facing when it comes to racial discrimination in their community is real, and that the state of Colorado will support them and will protect them against abusive practices moving forward. I look forward to partnering with the Attorney General and others as we continue our work to ensure that law enforcement acts with integrity and is held accountable when they don't. I'll go ahead and pass the mic right now to Mari Newman, who will say a few words, and then we'll open it up for questions. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mari Newman. I'm a civil rights lawyer here in Colorado. I represent and have represented many victims of police brutality in Aurora and across Colorado and elsewhere, including Elijah McClain's father, Loane Mosley, Shatea Kelly, a young Black woman who was begging for her life as an Aurora police officer had her hogtied upside down in the backseat of his patrol car, and many, many others over the course of the last 2 decades. I had the honor of working with Representative Herod last year to help draft and pass Senate Bill 217. And, this was a bill that came from a long effort that we had been working on along with many, many stakeholders. It began back in the fall of 2019, actually after the murder of Elijah McClain and Devon Bailey, a young man in Colorado Springs, by the police departments. And I called Representative Herod as I was driving back from Colorado Springs, having just met with Devon Bailey's family. And we were just talking about what could we do to make systemic change, to make sure that these horrifying police brutality murders don't happen again in Colorado. And we began drafting what ultimately became SB 217. There wasn't a political appetite for it at the time, though. The American public was still naive to the fact that there is a persistent problem of racist brutality in our police departments. And it was only after the tragic death of George Floyd, murdered by Minneapolis police, that people took to the streets. And here in Colorado, when people were chanting out in front of the Capitol every single day, our elected officials like Representative Herod stood up, said we need to make change, and Representative Herod jumped into action. We were able to take what we had been working on for SB 217, put in additional critical provisions to make sure that there was adequate accountability for law enforcement here in Colorado. And I'm proud to say that one of the elements of SB 217 is the part of the law that provided the state attorney general with the legal authority to conduct the pattern and practice investigation that we've heard about today. And because of that authority granted by SB 217, our Colorado State Attorney General has done an extensive investigation and has determined what those of us who have been watching have known is true for a long time. The Aurora Police Department and the Aurora Fire Department have engaged in a pattern and practice of racist policing, of police brutality that disproportionately impacts people of color and particularly Black people, that they don't keep adequate records regarding the reasons why they stop people, and that is because they racially profile, and that the Aurora Fire Department has an inadequate structure in place to monitor the use of a dangerous drug like ketamine, and so that things like what happened to Elijah McClain happen, where police force medications to be weaponized, and where fire department goes along with that. Now, we're thrilled to see that today's announcement demonstrates that the law is doing exactly what we had intended it to do, to give our state attorney general the authority to look into these practices, to make recommendations, to expose problem departments, and to make changes that must be followed by court order. And we hope that this is just the beginning of what this law can do to protect Coloradans, that other departments will step back and not wait for the Attorney General to conduct a similar investigation, but step back and say, my goodness, how can we change our practices before we engage in more racist brutality? And this can serve as a model across the entire country. And so we are very pleased to see Attorney General Phil Weiser's announcement today about these findings. They come as no surprise. They are exactly as we anticipated and as we knew all along. And we hope that this serves as a model across Colorado and the nation.
Thank you. We'll now open to questions.
I saw that John had his hand up first. So John, we'll go to you.
Yes, thank you. Representative Herod, John Frank here. I'm hoping you can touch on the point that Mari made there at the end. What do you hope happens next? I think you'd probably agree that the city of Aurora is not the only place where police brutality is taking place. How far do you hope Attorney General Weiser uses this power to conduct these kind of investigations? Do you want to see other investigations of other local departments? Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for that question. So, this comes down, quite frankly, also to the resources that we give the Attorney General. We initially put the pattern and practice investigation in this bill without knowing necessarily the scope of the claims that may come. And it's my understanding, quite frankly, that other citizens have already reported other departments. And that if the Attorney General has the resources and feels like it is appropriate to do so, would like to investigate other departments as well. As Mari can attest, through her legal practice, we know that these pattern and practice of racist behavior and brutality is not limited to Aurora, although we know it is definitely happening in Aurora. It's likely happening in other places as well. And so I would like to see this continue and not end with Aurora, but it should be a lesson to those other cities and counties and other departments that they need to put their policies in place, that they need to make sure that their practices are safe for the community. Otherwise, they will be investigated. And so this is an important provision of Senate Bill 217 and then also 1250 and 1251. But together is really how we're going to see that accountability. And citizens need to come forward and talk about what's happened to them and report and know that Colorado will have its back and hold these law enforcement officers accountable.
Lori Jane.
Sure. Thank you. For Mari, I wanted to get your thoughts on, you've had multiple settlements with the Aurora Police Department dating back many, many years, in which they were supposed to have made similar changes or paid attention to some of the same violations. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on what you think, how you think this will be different. And then for Rep. Herod, I wondered if you could kind of put into perspective the magnitude of Elijah McClain's life and death, and had he not had, what his impact is on this.
I appreciate that question. What we know is that we cannot depend on police departments to police themselves. They simply don't do it. And so you reference other settlements. There was a case that I litigated many, many years ago with my colleagues on behalf of a young man named Jamal Bonner. He was killed by Aurora Police Department in the context of a prostitution sting. He was surprised when officers burst into the room and stood up very quickly, and he was shot and killed. And in response to that, we settled the case. But the biggest part of the settlement was actually Aurora's legally binding commitments that it would make structural changes, that it would change its policies and it would change its procedures, and critically, that it would change its recruitment and its retention policies and support officers of color with the goal that its police force would look more like the communities that it polices and hopefully help prevent some of this racist police brutality that we continue to see in Aurora. Unfortunately, what we saw is that years and years and years after that settlement, Aurora simply failed to live up to its legally binding promises. And so they continue to engage in the same police brutality. The department does not reflect the community, and we continue to see these problems. So looking today at the Attorney General's findings, there's, I think this time things will be different, I hope, because there has been a comprehensive state, so let me start that sentence again. I'm hoping that that this time it will be different. There has been a very comprehensive legal report, a public finding by our Colorado State Attorney General highlighting the police brutality, the civil rights violations, and other system-wide problems within the city of Aurora. The Attorney General has committed to working to create a legally binding consent decree, which will force the city of Aurora to make changes that will be overseen by a court. And if Aurora fails to engage in those changes, Senate Bill 217 gives the Colorado State Attorney General legal authority to file its own litigation against the city of Aurora to enforce the law.
And Lori, to answer the other part of your question about Elijah McClain, I can't understate the impact that Elijah McClain's death has had on Colorado, quite frankly, and Coloradans. Had it not been for his murder and the fight of his mother, I don't think we would necessarily be here in the same place today. And so unfortunately, because of the suffering that his family had to go through, along with others in Colorado, and because the protesters not only lifted their voices to demand accountability and change, but also stood in the face of police brutality to fight for that change, we are here today. And I think it's important to note and to say to the protesters that what you suffered is real. What you suffered is unjust and should not happen in the city of Aurora, in the state of Colorado, or quite frankly, this country. And I want you to know that your sacrifice also was not in vain and has led us here today. So for everyone who stood up for Elijah and for all of the survivors and victims of police brutality, we are making change in Colorado because of you.
Blair, go ahead.
Hey, I guess this is both for you, Mari, and for you, Representative Harrod. We've obviously seen lots of federal DOJ consent decrees with various police departments and cities here across the country over the past several years, decades. What's your confidence that this new state kind of consent decree can have the type of effects that the Attorney General says that it should have, should this agreement be reached between them and the city?
Representative Harrod, do you want to start? Well, I think one thing that gives us confidence is the law itself. So SB 217 grants the legal authority to the Colorado State Attorney General, not just to conduct this investigation into the patterns and practice of civil rights violations, but it also allows for the Attorney General to file its own lawsuit. And so if Aurora fails to live up to its obligations to make changes, then there will be continued litigation. And what we know is that Attorney General Phil Weiser has taken this very seriously. He put together a team which did a comprehensive analysis. They've put together a report that takes very seriously these issues of racism and police brutality and misuse of weaponizing a medication, in this case ketamine. And we're very, we place our faith in the Attorney General to move forward in a way that is meaningful, and he's committed to doing that. But if for some reason he didn't, what we know is that the people of Colorado know how to use their voices. And as Representative Herod said, there have been protests across the entire state where people put their own bodies on the line to make sure that their lawmakers heard that enough is enough. They cannot tolerate any more of this racist brutality. Now, unfortunately, there are also many civil rights lawsuits, including a class case against the city of Aurora for engaging in First Amendment violations and racist brutality against the protesters themselves. But we trust the system is going to allow this to work. Phil Weiser has committed to it, and the law provides him the authority to do so.
Yeah, and I am quite confident. I'm quite confident that this will result in change for Colorado. This is a new day in policing for Colorado. We have been on a very clear path alongside of the Attorney General, the General Assembly, and the governor to say that we will not tolerate brutality in policing anymore in our state, and a clear acknowledgement that it has in fact happened. And so I believe that change will come and is coming. But additionally, the other provisions in the bill make sure that if we have an attorney general that chooses not to move forward in a way that maybe we think they should, or the citizens of Colorado think they should, that there are other provisions like the body camera footage requirements, like the ending of qualified immunity, like the very clear law against use of chokeholds and other use of force like ketamine. And so we have put things in place that will really, I think, ensure that if accountability falls down in one place, there's another place that it can pick right back up, and multiple areas and triggers and levers for change and accountability. That is hugely, hugely, hugely important. And folks need to know that if they act outside of the duties of the law or their own duty, that they will be held accountable, be it by their own department, be it by the courts, or quite frankly, the Attorney General, but definitely within the state of Colorado. And so I think we have created an environment here in Colorado that will elevate the profession of policing and hold those accountable that shouldn't wear the badge.
Thank you both.
Pat, go ahead.
Hi, for Representative Herod, good to see you, first of all. So you had mentioned earlier that further investigations would be kind of dependent on providing the Attorney General with more funding. Obviously, as a member of JBC, that's kind of within your purview. Should we expect to see kind of a stepped up budget for the Department of Law and for the Attorney General in this coming year?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of him, but I would assume that he will be putting in that request. The investigation initially did come also with a request to the Joint Budget Committee for additional resources so that he could ensure that he was doing a thorough investigation and that he had the resources to do so. And I think that that's important. We want to make sure that the investigation does have that integrity and can move forward with the weight of the state of Colorado in a way that we can all feel confident in. And so I can be very clear today in stating that if we do receive that request from the Attorney General, I will support it. And I hope my colleagues will too, because it's important for Coloradans. I mean, we are talking about the life and safety of Coloradans in our cities and counties throughout Colorado. We cannot push this aside anymore. And we need to say that if there are departments that need to be investigated or that have done harm in their communities, that they will be held under a microscope and be held to account. And so absolutely, I would support making sure that the Attorney General has the resources he needs to do these investigations in places that he deems are appropriate.
Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, question for Representative Herod. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit beyond accountability and to the kinds of solutions that you'd like to see, specifically in Aurora right now with them in the spotlight. What kind of solutions are required to transform this department from the one that the Attorney General described today?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying that the racial element here cannot be understated. And so the Aurora Police Department really does need to do more around around racial equity within its department, but that goes beyond diversity, equity, and inclusion work, or a training. This is really in-depth work that needs to happen to not only hold officers accountable who act biasly, but to make sure that officers know where their biases lie and to overcome that. I think that's extremely, extremely, extremely important. And they need to make sure that when they are hiring, right, that they hire officers that don't have a history of this bias activity or excessive use of force, and that when they are letting officers go, which was highlighted in the report, that they remove officers who are harmful in our community as quickly and immediately as possible and hold them to account as well. And I believe that we need to look even deeper and think about what the mental health of our officers are. I think the mental health component was interesting in the report as well. Officers are using excessive force against those who have mental illness in Aurora, but we got to look at also at the mental health and wellness of those officers. Should we look at ongoing psychological evaluations at the local level for hiring and retention of officers? Absolutely. Do we need to make sure that the citizen oversight is as robust and has as much power as needed to make changes in the community? Absolutely. And do we need to make sure that we increase line items in the budget for alternative responses for policing, like what we have in Denver with the STAR model? And I know Aurora is looking at implementing. Absolutely. And so, quite frankly, there needs to be a complete overhaul of the Aurora Police Department and Fire Department to ensure that those who are wearing those badges are actually holding the values of that community and making sure that community is kept safe. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done at the Aurora level, but I'm not going to limit it to there. I think it needs to happen across the state.
Faith, did you have a question?
Pat asked it. Well, actually, I did have a follow-up. Is it possible, Representative Herod, to get any kind of federal money to help pay for these investigations? Like if they aren't going to do them themselves?
I do believe that there is opportunity for the state of Colorado, the Attorney General, and local departments to use not only state dollars, but federal dollars, grant dollars, nonprofit dollars to make changes that are necessary within their departments or agencies. And so you're absolutely right. It's not just a state responsibility. It's one that we all share. And it is my hope that we will see also federal dollars coming in to support. We do have recovery and stimulus dollars that are being able to be used for justice type activities. And so I think there are already some opportunities and there should be more. And I will note that I have been working in partnership with Congressman Neguse as well as Congressman Crow to look at federal remedies as well and look at how the federal government can mirror and support what the state is doing. And I know they're pushing that out in Washington. And so this is really just the beginning, I think, of so many more changes to come and proof that what we're doing in Colorado is working.
Lori Jane, did you have a follow-up? Estelle, your hand is still up. Okay. Any additional questions? Allison, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong camera. I just wanted to ask Representative Herod, Shanine McLean has just called for Mayor Kaufman's resignation, and I wondered to see if you had a comment on that.
Shanine McLean really is a driving force behind so much of the change that's happened in Colorado. Allison, I know we've talked about it, but for those of you all who don't know, Mari and I really started this work in 2019 when Mari informed me of the murder of Elijah McClain. But it wasn't until Shanine McLean took the steps, took the Capitol in 2020 and took literally the megaphone from me and said, why weren't you here for my son? We need to do more to fight for justice for Elijah. And that really was a tipping point in our movement here in Colorado and really elevated Elijah's murder to international heights. And so I and the state of Colorado owe Shanine a debt of gratitude and also an apology for what happened to her son. And so hearing what you just said, I have not spoken with her today, but what I will say is that I support Shanine and what she needs 100%. And if she is calling for this and is backed by the citizens of Aurora, then I will stand with them.
All right, thank you all for joining us.